Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. So this week, to understand our guest, we need to roll back nearly 410 years, back to the era of Galileo Galilei, the Italian astronomer who had the heretical idea that the Earth was not at the centre of the known universe. For those heliocentric views, Galileo was put on trial by the Roman Inquisition and in fact put under house arrest for the rest of his life. He was ridiculed by scientists of the day and generally declaimed for having the temerity to suggest something that was contrary to the views of, I think, the Greek philosopher Ptolemy. Anyway, our guest today is Professor Avi Loeb, and he attained his PhD in plasma physics at the impossible age of 24 from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And since 1993, he's been based out of Harvard University, where he's the professor of science and former chair of that department. Professor Loeb has authored over 1,000 research papers and 8 books, including most recently and probably most provocatively, Extraterrestrial in 2022 and Interstellar in 2023. In July 2021, Professor Loeb co-founded what's known as the Galileo Project, an effort to bring the search for extraterrestrial technological signatures of extraterrestrial technological civilizations beyond mere accidental or anecdotal observations and legends into mainstream science. Now, unlike the SETI project, which only looks for electromagnetic signatures, Galileo is looking for physical evidence of ET, NHI life, not just electromagnetic signals. This professor wants to find a spaceship. And surely, Professor, you're risking heresy yourself amongst your scientific colleagues. Welcome to Reality Check, Professor Avi Loeb.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. I am maintaining my childhood curiosity. I was born on a farm, and I'm still a curious farm boy trying to figure out the world. And I don't care how many likes I get on social media. In fact, I have no footprint there. My goal is to figure out whether we have a neighbor, a cosmic neighbor. And one way to figure it out is by searching our backyard for objects. If we find a tennis ball thrown by a neighbor, we know the neighbor plays tennis. If we realize that we are not alone, we might go out and meet the neighbor. And these are very important implications for the future of humanity. And I, rather than surrendering to prejudice or to opinions that many people have on the subject, I want to seek the evidence. And, that's a traditional approach that was pioneered actually by Nicolaus Copernicus. A couple of months ago, the Polish government invited me to give a keynote speech to celebrate the 550th year anniversary for his birth. And he realized, by the way, he was not as controversial as Galileo because he was a priest and he wanted to help the church. The church had a problem. They could not figure out when Easter takes place. They always got it wrong by a few days because they had the earth at the center of the world. And Copernicus realized that if he puts the sun in the middle of the solar system, he can figure out Easter correctly. So he offered them this model and they said, thank you very much, it really works and we will adapt it. But they banned his book until the 19th century. It was a forbidden book. And he pioneered the method of science whereby, it doesn't really matter what your prior ideas are, but if the data shows you something else, that's the best way to gain new knowledge. So I'm seeking evidence. We've been, as you said, we've been looking for radio signals for 70 years. And this is just like waiting for a phone call at home. Nobody may call you because they don't realize that you're lonely, or they may be addicted to digital screens the way we are. And so
Well, can I ask you this, Professor? That's one thing about SETI. I'm inviting you to be controversial here. It's never made a lot of sense to me that aliens, if they are as advanced as we suspect they are, if aliens are an advanced, highly advanced future technology that we don't know about yet, what is the likelihood that they would be using something as banal as radio waves? It's an almost impossible idea, isn't it?
well, it makes little sense because it also exposes their existence to the outside. And if they want to survive a long period of time, they would rather hide themselves or develop other means of communication. And actually, we produced the strongest radio signals around after the Second World War, when the US had a system for finding ballistic missiles using very powerful radars. And since then, we are communicating in very different ways, not using radio waves. It's actually a bad approach to prepare for a neighbor by imagining that the neighbor is just like you, because we can do that if we know that the neighbor has the same DNA as we have. But if it belongs to a different star, all bets are off. It could be something far more advanced than us, because we had a century of science and technology, and that's just one part in 100 million of the age of the universe. And if they had 1,000 years, just imagine ourselves 1,000 years from now, it would look like magic or miracles to us, what we are capable of doing in 1,000 years. And so we should just be agnostic and search. And I think it's most likely for us to find space trash, things that were thrown out of other planets that arrived to our neighborhood simply because it takes less than 1 billion years, even for our own rockets, to traverse the Milky Way from one side to the other. And by the way, Elon Musk used his Tesla Roadster car as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy launch in 2018. And within 20 million years, it might crash onto Earth. We cannot see it with our best telescopes because it's too small to reflect enough sunlight for us to see. But the point is that my colleagues would argue, it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. I say, maybe Elon Musk is not the most accomplished entrepreneur in space since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. Let's allow for the possibility that there are all kinds of technological gadgets floating in interstellar space, and every now and then one of them comes close to Earth, and we can see it.
So can I pin you down, Professor, on why you are so interested in the subject of extraterrestrial, non-human intelligent life? Is it something you've had an experience with? Have you had any kind of an encounter? Have you seen anything anomalous?
No, I am interested in it because, first of all, I was intrigued by the fact that only over the past decade, we found objects from outside the solar system in astronomy. The first one reported in October 2017. And that intrigued me because I wrote a paper a decade earlier forecasting no such rocks from other stars detected by this telescope in Hawaii. It just didn't have the sensitivity. And then based on what we know about the solar system, it was really surprising that it noticed a rock or an object that came from outside the solar system. And this object actually looked very different than the asteroids or comets that we are familiar with. It had a very extreme shape. It was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And also it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without evaporating, without showing any cometary tail of gas or dust. And to me, it illustrated the possibility that we might be surprised by what visits us. And that may be space trash. The evidence we collected cannot tell us whether it's artificial or natural, but it's quite possible that it's actually artificial based on its weirdness. And then I discovered with my student that there was an earlier object 4 years before that, the size of a watermelon, that collided with Earth, and the fireball that it generated as a result of its friction on air was detected by US government satellites. And it was moving faster than the escape speed from the solar system. In fact, it was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun. And moreover, it exploded only in the lower atmosphere, implying that its material strength was higher than even iron meteorites. So I decided to lead an expedition. After the US Space Command confirmed the data, they looked back at the data and wrote an official letter to NASA when I reached out to them through the White House. And so that confirmation led me to establish an expedition at a cost of $1.5 million with a team of 30 people. We went to the Pacific Ocean, to the location, the site of this meteor, and we collected materials from the ocean floor at a depth of about 2 kilometers across a region of 10 kilometers in size that was localized as the fireball site by the Department of Defense. And over the past 9 months, we analyzed those materials. We found that 10% of the droplets, the molten droplets that we found on the ocean floor, have composition that does not resemble materials from the solar system. It was never reported in the scientific literature. And so we had to give it a new name. And we are planning to go back and search for bigger pieces. The ones that we identified were less than a millimeter in size. We want to find maybe even the core of the object, because that would tell us whether it's a technological gadget or a rock.
Can I just go through this very slowly with you, Professor, because I'm fascinated by this case. Firstly, you've copped some very strong Galileo-like criticism for daring to suggest that this interstellar object might in fact have been some kind of technological artifact. Just explain to me, why do you believe, what's the evidence to show that this object, whatever it was that hit the ocean, is the object that came from space? Because I know some people have suggested that the seismic data that you relied on in some cases was inaccurate and it was possibly just a rolling truck or something. But the most important thing is, what is it about the constituents of those spherules that you found that makes you think that it is perhaps, well, let's be blunt about it, a melted spacecraft of some kind?
Well, so first, the location. We based the search on the Department of Defense data. It came from sensors on board the US government satellites that detected the fireball, the light from the explosion. And we went back and forth across this region of 10 kilometers in size 26 times. Now, just before we went there, we looked at some data from seismometers in the area that we found only one seismometer that actually had a signal at the time of the explosion, but it was not used to guide us because we searched the entire area defined by the US Space Command. And then recently, some scientists said, oh, we don't believe the seismometer data was a meteor, maybe it was a truck, but they ignored the US government data that guided us in the first place. And that was really...
Can I quickly pick you up on that? Because I'm fascinated by the fact that you have been given, a scientist working at Harvard's illustrious Harvard University has been given access to defense data from super, super secret satellites that I know have downlinks here over Australia. And I have sources here in Australia who've told me that they've seen some of this data and that it's quite extraordinary what we can see in outer space. Let's just ask a theoretical question here, sir. Based on the knowledge that you have from what you've seen of the DoD data, without telling me anything about its capabilities, let's protect the secrets of the United States. Do you think the United States government would be aware if alien spacecraft were entering and exiting Earth's atmosphere with the technology that you've been apprised of?
Yes, I would think so. If we are dealing with objects that produce a fireball, definitely, because the sensors that the US government is using are designed within a fraction of a second to detect the launch of ballistic missiles from the heat that they generate. And then they report to the US president about those because it could be a national security risk. And now, this agency, the US Space Command, is funded at $30 billion a year, more than the budget of NASA. And they come out with an official letter to NASA confirming that this meteor was interstellar in origin. Now, a year later, astronomers write and publish a paper in the Astrophysical Journal saying, we don't believe this agency. So not only are they saying that taxpayers' money is being wasted, I mean, they should also lose sleep at night because, you know, if a ballistic missile was heading towards Washington, D.C., and this agency is unable to figure out the speed of the ballistic missile by a factor of 3, as they are arguing about this meteor not being interstellar, that there was a mistake by a factor of 3, you know, and they would report to the US president that ballistic missile is going towards Mexico instead of Washington, D.C. That's a serious matter. And they published this claim in the Astrophysical Journal. So I say, this is not serious. You know, this is a childish behavior of them to dismiss data that was double-checked by the US government. I go there, and then I find materials. And now they say, oh, these materials might be coal ash. And so we checked 55 elements from the periodic table, and we verified that it's not coal ash. And what I'm trying to say is that some of these scientists keep looking for reasons to dismiss this study, which is, you know, just the way science is done. It took a lot of work to design this expedition, go there, collect the materials, and then analyze them for 9 months. These people are just like critics. You know, they look around, they don't do anything. They just try to criticize and bring enough dust up in the air so that they can claim they can't see anything. And I see that as an attempt that is anti-science, actually, rather than what they claim to do. They claim to protect science. In fact, they are damaging science, because science should be based on evidence, and we should not have a prejudice. And the only way to learn something new is to collect the data and the evidence through hard work, which is what I'm doing.
Now, sir, I spoke to a few of your colleagues in astrophysics and asked them about you before we did this interview. And one of them chuckled wryly when I asked him about Professor Avi Loeb. And I said, give me a word that describes him. And he said, I can't give you one word, I can give you 3. Dogged, courageous, and contrarian. And I respect that. I think for somebody doing the work that you're doing, especially making an inquiry into essentially the idea of non-human intelligent life, you have to be those 3 things, don't you? You're going against the scientific establishment, very much like Galileo did 400 plus years ago.
Yeah, so every morning I jog at sunrise. I do it on land, and I did it also on the ship that we had in the Pacific Ocean that was fittingly called Silver Star. It was an Australian ship. And one morning we had a Netflix team that is making a documentary about my research. One morning they decided to join me at sunrise, and they asked me to jog 3 times the usual amount of time that I jog. It was about 10 miles or 15 kilometers. Then the director asked me, Avi, it looks like you're running. Are you running away from something or towards something? And I said both. I'm running away from some of my colleagues who have strong opinions without seeking evidence. And I'm running towards a higher intelligence in interstellar space. And you know...
Well, can I ask you this? Can I ask you this, sir? You believe, fundamentally, the implication behind your research is that you believe the evidence on UFOs, UAPs, is now sufficiently there prima facie. You know, there's enough on the facts to suggest there might be something there. What is your view about the likelihood that this planet has been visited by non-human intelligences?
You see, this is a path that was not taken by scientists. And when you take a new path, there is a chance that you will find low-hanging fruits. And if you think about new data that we will get, in a year, there will be the Rubin Observatory in Chile. It has a camera that was just constructed the size of a person with 3.2 billion pixels, 1,000 times more pixels than your cell phone camera. And it will survey the southern sky every 4 days. And based on my calculations, it has a chance of seeing an Oumuamua-like object every month or every couple of months. So there will be many more. We will not be in the dark. And among rocks that we might find from interstellar space, we might also see a technological gadget. And that's the way to find it. And we are developing with my postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, the Richard Cloet, we are developing the tools that will allow us to identify interstellar objects from the data stream coming from the Rubin Observatory. In addition, I'm planning to go back to the Pacific Ocean and visit also the site we've been to look for bigger pieces, but have a second expedition in the future to look for another interstellar meteor. Altogether, my hope is that it will become obvious once we find the data and the evidence, and it will be available to the public. We can wait for the US government to tell us what they know, but it may be just like waiting for Godot, because first of all, they are not scientists. They are worried about national security. They have a different day job. My day job is to figure out what lies outside the solar system. And since they are not giving me any data, I will get the data myself, because the sky is not classified, the oceans are not classified, and we have the freedom of studying these media to figure out if we are alone or not. We shouldn't rely on the US government to tell us whether we are alone.
Now, one of the things I read was your paper, your preliminary paper on the so-called spherules that you recovered from the ocean. And they apparently contained an abundance of beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium, described as a never-seen-before B-low composition. And they also exhibited iron isotopic ratios unlike those found on Earth. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so what we did is look at 60 elements from the periodic table and measure the abundances of those elements in the unique type of spherules that were only found around the meteor site. And we realized that some elements have an abundance that is up to 1,000 times bigger than in solar system materials. And there are many such elements, but the most prominent ones are the ones you mentioned: beryllium, lanthanum, uranium, and we called it Belau composition because there was no name for it in the scientific literature. And it's possible that this composition is originated from a natural source. And just to give you an example, if you take a planet like the Earth and bring it close to the most common type of star, a dwarf star that has 1/10 of the mass of the sun, the planet will be melted and also spaghettified into a stream of debris, half of which will be ejected to interstellar space at the speeds that resemble that of this meteor. And since you melt the rock, you could get differentiation. Some elements will be left and others will be removed from those rocks that go to interstellar space. And so that's a natural mechanism of reaching those unusual abundance patterns. And I wrote about it in a paper, but obviously until we find bigger pieces, we will not know what the origin is. And I should say, if we find a technological gadget and it has buttons on it, the question is, should we press a button?
Well, I'd be pressing it, sir, just to find out what happens next. One of the things that really does strike me, though, about the response to your spherules investigation is the antagonism, the hostility, and the ridicule that's been directed at you by people on no solid basis, because a lot was made of this seismic claim. The claim was that you'd simply tried to find these spherules in an area based on seismic data, which, as I understand it from my reading, is not true. And yet what really shocked me was the New York Times, one of the most eminent newspapers in the world. It abandoned any pretense at objectivity when it did a story about your case. And it asked a very mocking question of a guy called Benjamin Fernando, a planetary seismologist at Johns Hopkins University, who pushed this idea that you just picked up data from a passing truck. And the New York Times said, "How did you conclude that we're not being invaded by aliens?" Now, frankly, Professor, you're a very polite, genteel chap, and I'm going to say it for you. That was just a piss take. It was an attempt by a newspaper to take the mickey out of you and mock you and ridicule you. How do you feel about that? How do you respond to something like that?
Well, first of all, I should say the New York Times Magazine had a large feature article about my research just half a year earlier. And so they're seeking clickbaits, and some of their reporters are very superficial, and that's the nature of journalism these days, and we should just rather than mud wrestle with those who are superficial. I mean, I don't want to get dirty. My approach is very different. An eagle very often has a crow pecking on its neck, and you might suspect that the eagle would try to fight the crow off the back of its back, but instead the eagle rises to greater heights where the oxygen level is low, and the crow drops off the eagle's back. And that is the approach that I prefer to take after being bruised in interactions that I had previously. And so I just ignore those people who do not make sense. Many of them are really second level scientists. Some of them are not even scientists. They are just bloggers who did not publish even a single scientific paper over the past year. So I asked, if you have a person looking at a soccer match and making comments and telling the players how to pass the ball without actually being on the field, why should we listen to that person? How dare he say that? I'm a player, I'm writing scientific papers every month, several of them. I'm really on the field, and it takes a lot of effort to do the scientific work. I just don't want to be distracted. And so my approach is to ignore those low-level critics and move on, because eventually once we have solid evidence, nobody could ignore it. By now we realize that we are not at the center of the world, and that happens to, even though it is a blow to our ego, it happens to be very useful. If you want to get to Mars, you better not believe that Mars orbits the Earth, okay? And so knowing what Galileo and Copernicus said helps us cope with reality. And if we realize that we have a neighbor, it would have huge implications for our future, both in terms of religious beliefs that people have and in terms of what we aspire to do.
Now, sir, one of the stories I am fascinated by, and I've spent a lot of time trying to track him down and chase down this story, and I don't know if you're going to tell me about this, but I know you know about this because I have my sources in Israel who tell me you've also been trying to contact him, is the story of Haim Eshed, an Israeli professor of aeronautics and astronautics, a retired brigadier general in Israeli military intelligence. He was the director of space programs for the Israeli Defense Department for 30 years, chair of its space committee, the father of Israel's space program. And in an extraordinary interview in December 2020, Haim Eshed claimed that the government of the United States had been in contact with ET life for years, and that it had signed secret agreements with a galactic federation to do experiments on Earth. He even claimed there was a joint base underground on Mars where aliens collaborate with US astronauts. Now, he claimed President Trump was told about this, but was stopped from revealing it because of fears of mass hysteria. Now, it's too easy to dismiss this chap as somebody who's mentally ill or aged and infirm, because I'm told he's not. I'm told he's still got his marbles, that Haim Eshed is a very, very astute, very clever, and extremely well-respected man. And in fact, another chap called Isaac Ben Israel, the chairman of the Israel Space Agency, whom I know you know, he has also said that whilst Eshed went too far with his claims, he vouched for Haim Eshed's seriousness, sincerity, and standing in the field. Now, I apologize for that ridiculously long question, but there are millions of people watching you right now, Professor. Tell me, what do you think of Haim Eshed's theory? the suggestion that we are already in touch with ETs?
Well, his remarks echo what we heard from David Grush. And, in December 2023, just 5 months ago, I spoke with David Grush, and I asked him for details, clear evidence to substantiate what he is talking about. He said that he cannot provide it because of legal issues. But he himself, talked about things that resemble what Chaim Eshed talked about. Around the same time, I was also visiting CERN. Interestingly, the host showed me the book by Eshed. Now, Eshed gave all this information in a magazine interview to a journalist, but he did not include the details in his book. And so the host was asking me to translate from Hebrew to English. And when I looked at the book, I realized that Eshed is speaking about me. And he was talking about Oumuamua. I've never had a discussion with him, but I know that he was well aware of what I'm doing and appreciating the science that I'm doing. And as you said, I don't think he went crazy. I do think that the people regard him very highly when and still are. And so it's interesting, maybe there is some fire behind the smoke. I mean, we hear from different people. Now, within government, within the US government, there might be different sections, some of which are not aware of what's going on in others. And that may explain why the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office insists that there is nothing really extraterrestrial in what they are doing. So, we can wait for the evidence to come out or for more people to eventually reveal it. I had a visitor from Lockheed Martin, someone that used to play an important role there at my home. And I said, do you believe or do you think that there is any substance behind David Grush's claim? Maybe a corporation like Lockheed Martin has some materials, maybe the government gave it. And I expected him to dismiss it up front, but instead he said, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. And so it might well be that the materials are not held by the Pentagon, by the Department of Defense, but they were given to corporations. And in that case, the corporations would develop a relationship very similar to a patient-psychiatrist relation. A psychiatrist never solves the problem of the patient because, they get paid for addressing them. And so, the corporations are not following a scientific narrative. They are not trying to inform humanity of astronomical realizations. And so as a result, they never resolve the issue. They never tell the US government the full story. And they don't have necessarily the best scientists. So the only way forward is either to get to the source within government or to actually collect the information ourselves rather than wait for them. And I take the second...
Can I just interrupt there for a moment, Professor? I just wanted to pin you down. I was told that you tried to meet Chaim Eshed.
Right.
Did you try?
I tried to meet him, but didn't. In the last visit that I had to Israel, it didn't work out. So maybe next time.
Can I ask you this? Have you spoken to any people in Israel about Chaim Eshed's claims?
Yeah. I did.
I think his claims are extraordinarily significant. And I have sources in both Israel and America who've told me that Chaim Eshed is an incredible figure in the Israel space program. People speak about him with awe. And as one person said to me, if Chaim Eshed says that, I'm taking it seriously. Are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I talked with people who know him well, and they have a great respect to what he says. And so the only issue I have is that I haven't seen the evidence. He was talking about things, but, it's really difficult to embrace an opinion without seeing the evidence, the facts behind it, even documents, you know. I haven't seen any of those. I'm trying to do my best job as a scientist. And I believe, if you ask me, I believe it's arrogant for us to think that we are alone, that we are the smartest that ever lived, the smartest species since the Big Bang. And I think we will soon get a reality check on that, either from AI that becomes comparable to the human brain as we speak. And within years, we will not be the most intelligent entities on Earth, irrespective of extraterrestrials, but that would give us sort of a sense of modesty. And I think in the distant future, if we find a neighbor that is far more advanced than we are, that has access to technologies that we do not understand, those, you know, that experience will be similar to Moses in the biblical story, seeing the burning bush that was never consumed. And, you know, if obviously you can find online nowadays gadgets that would impress Moses as much as he was impressed to believe in a superhuman entity that he called God. But even for us, you know, if we bring technologies that we will use 100 years from now, if we were to witness them now, we would be at awe, a religious awe, and we might start to believe in a superhuman entity. And for me, you know, this is, you know, the sense of awe that was lost when Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead. And, you know, after that, that was in 1882. After that, we had the age of science and technology that manifests hubris, you know, human arrogance. And it's about time for us to develop a new sense of modesty. And I think that sense will be brought by a package from a neighbor that we would find in our backyard.
You've said previously, I'm struck by the religious references you've made there, and you've said previously you're not religious, but that you're struck by the order we find in the universe, by the regularity, by the existence of rules of nature. And you've said you are in awe of how the laws of nature we find here on Earth seem to apply all the way out to the edge of the universe. And that is remarkable. Does such order ever make you wonder, not whether there's a creator, be that a god, or maybe it's just a highly technological, incredibly advanced alien civilization?
Yeah, in fact, you know, I get this sense of awe, especially after visiting the rooms of my daughters in the morning. I mean, they are a mess. The natural state is chaos, okay? And nevertheless, if you look at the universe, it's very organized. The laws we find on Earth apply everywhere. Actually, the universe started from the simplest possible set of initial conditions. It was nearly uniform. And the complexity that we find today was a result of gravity pulling together matter. Now, the fundamental question that I would actually ask on the first date with an extraterrestrial is, what happened before the Big Bang? Because at the moment, we don't have a theory that predicts that. You need to marry quantum mechanics with gravity in order to figure it out. And we just don't have a predictive theory that tells us that. And in my mind, you know, once we get to the point where we have a theory of quantum gravity, I can imagine the possibility of our engineers, quantum gravity engineers, creating a baby universe in the laboratory. And now the question is, did our universe start this way? Is it possible that our universe was created by some scientist or engineer in a white lab coat? And you might call it that entity God, but it may well be a natural product of understanding how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. Now, if you make such a universe, you will make it in the simplest possible way. You will start with uniform initial conditions, a universe that has zero energy, which is our universe, because the expansion energy of the universe is exactly balanced by the gravitational binding energy of the universe. So it has zero energy. It's a very simple initial state. And that would be the kind of state that if I wanted to create in the laboratory, I would make it. And then let gravity take its part and eventually create complexity. But it all started from a very simple initial state. And, you know, an advanced technological civilization that can create a baby universe in the laboratory or can create life in the laboratory would have all the qualities that we ascribed to traditional religious thinking about God. And so to me, there is a way of bringing together science and religion by actually through the method of finding a much more advanced level of science that can create miracles for us.
Well, Professor, I, for one, take my hat off to the fact that a learned academic with your incredible reputation and expertise is applying himself to the study of a phenomena that, frankly, many in science continue to ridicule and treat with taboo. So I doffs me hat to you, sir. So before we go this week, I want to pay tribute to the passing of one of the greats of research into the study of UFOs, UAPs, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who passed away in Ohio last week at the age of 82. I had the privilege of getting to know Bruce because of his great work into what was called the Kaikoura UFO incident in New Zealand. In December 1978, an Argosy cargo aircraft carrying newspapers from Christchurch to Blenheim, which was a little town just on the north of the South Island in New Zealand, it suddenly saw at thousands of feet these weird, luminous, spherical objects coming up to the cockpit window and then zooming away again. Bill Startup reported them when he got back to Christchurch, and this was picked up by a journalist in Australia, Leonard Lee, who asked the journalists that he knew in New Zealand at the time, a guy called Quentin Fogarty and another guy called Dennis Grant, both Australian journalists who happened to be in New Zealand at the time. He asked them to go and investigate the story. So they hired a local freelance cameraman called, wonderfully, Davy Crockett, and they went out on the Argosy aircraft for its next trip up the coast carrying newspapers, and incredibly they captured imagery of these objects. This became an absolute sensation, not least because it was only a few weeks after the disappearance, the mysterious disappearance, of an Australian pilot called Frederick Valentich over Bass Strait in Australia. So the public were switched on to UFOs. There was an awareness about this issue, and as a young teenage kid myself, this story probably captured my attention more than any other to make me realise that there really was something to the UFO phenomenon. And a large part of that is in due tribute to Dr. Bruce Maccabee, because he came out to New Zealand and Australia, looked at the film that was shot by Davy Crockett and Quentin Fogarty, and he came to the conclusion that the object, whatever it was not what the New Zealand Air Force had tried to explain it away as some kind of reflection of squid boat lights from the surface of the ocean. That one was a complete joke. The other one they tried to suggest was that it was Jupiter or Venus, and that one Bruce blew out of the water because of its astronomical knowledge. He proved they were nowhere near the area at the time. There was no way it fitted with what the crews say they saw. And in fact, it was Bruce's expertise working for the US Navy as an optical physicist that gave him the skills he had to be able to do this kind of analysis. He'll be sorely missed, Bruce. He was a really lovely bloke. He was very generous, warm and sharing. And I'll miss him, and I know a lot of other people will as well. Now, before we go, there's a couple of questions from our viewers that I'll try and get out of the way. The first one is, the Senate has been pretty quiet on UAPs, but you get the drift of it. They're basically asking what's happening behind the scenes. Well, I can tell you what's happening, a lot. There's a lot I can't talk about, and I'm sorry, we just have to be vague. Yes, there are witnesses who are being encouraged to come forward. There are good people who are deliberating about whether or not they give evidence. This is why the Schumer Amendment was so important. If that law had passed, this wouldn't be an issue. But basically, we need protection for potential whistleblowers. What the national security state has done very, very well is stop Congress from providing the protections that were necessary in order to ensure that whistleblowers would feel safe about coming forward. Here's one. Hi, Ross. The story of Michael Herrera has come to the fore again. They're asking me my views on the Michael Herrera story. I'm reserving judgment on that story. I've spoken to Michael. I like him. I find his presentation of what he says credible. I'm doing some research into it at the moment, and I'd certainly be very interested in hearing from anyone who can give me a lead one way or the other about what he says. What Michael describes is an extraordinary situation when he was a US Marine working in a disaster relief in Indonesia, and he says he came across a group of black-clad paramilitaries who were in company with a gigantic, hovering, metallic disc that appeared to be under United States control. It's an extraordinary story, and like a lot of the stories that I get, I'm keeping an open mind. I'm just interested to hear from any witness that can help me with any evidence to substantiate one way or the other. Somebody also asking me here about Jason Sands, the new whistleblower Jason Sands. I've also interviewed Jason, and fair to say, I think the best thing that could happen to prove up Jason's story, if it is true, is for people who were with him in the desert on the day that he says he came across an alien entity and an alien craft, would be for some of those witnesses to come forward and be willing to give evidence to corroborate his account. In all of these cases, what somebody like I looks for is corroboration, witness evidence that can support the primary evidence of a first-hand witness. If there is this organisation that wants to keep the UAPs argument secret, why doesn't Congress call out these people as traitors of the country and Constitution? Well, that's a bloody good question. I have no idea. It amuses me as well, because essentially if you believe what David Grush says, and I do think that there is a very grave allegation that I know Congress is fully briefed on, that we are faced with an egregious breach of the Constitution. Congress is meant to be the government. Even the president is beholden to Congress. And the key allegation that lies behind David Grush's claims is that Congress has been kept in the dark about very secret operations that are known about by people inside the intelligence community and Defence Department. Yes, if this is illegal, there is a question as to whether these people are traitors. It's up to you, the people, to tell Congress that you care about it. And it's up to those people who are supposedly hiding these secrets to justify their behaviour, because there is going to be a reckoning. That's all for this week. Lovely to see you. Let's talk another time when I've got more interesting stuff coming up on Reality Check. Thanks very much. G'day, hello, and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart, here for NewsNation on the UAP beat, telling you all the stories they don't want you to know about the vexing mystery of unidentified anomalous phenomena. How much does the Pentagon really know? How much does the intelligence community really know? And is Congress being told the truth? Well, clearly, this week it's come out that Congress doesn't think it's being told the truth. Representative Eric Burlison and 7 other congressional representatives have courageously put their name to a very strong letter that's gone to Speaker Johnson requesting the establishment of a UAP Select Committee to be set up as a subcommittee within the House Oversight and Accountability Committee. The letter that went to Speaker Johnson on the 12th of March is, I think, historic because of what it sets out and what it underlines about what congressional representatives clearly think is lies, deceit, and distrust oozing from the Pentagon and the intelligence community. They're not buying it. They're not buying the cover-up because, as we know, last Friday week, there was a decision made by the Pentagon to release a report which was an outrageous deceit on the American public and indeed on the planet. The Pentagon has formally denied any knowledge of extraterrestrial life or technology engaging with this planet. They've formally denied any retrieval of non-human technology, and they've formally denied any reverse engineering program. It's all very cautious language, and you could drive a truck through the holes that exist in how they've phrased their responses. None of the people that gave evidence to Arrow were put under oath, so they don't face any comeback at all if they're subsequently shown to be liars. Congress could, of course, haul them before the Congress and tickle their feet for basically misleading Congress, but it wouldn't be the first time that the Defense Department and the intelligence community has misled or flat out lied to the Congress. But this time, Congress isn't letting go. They're demanding a committee which would basically provide an opportunity for the committee to investigate and assess how transparent and accountable the federal government is when it comes to UAP. And the representatives that have put their name to this document, it's bipartisan. You've got on the Dem side, Jared Moskowitz from Florida, as well as Eric Burlison. You've got Tim Burchett from Tennessee, Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, Andy Ogles, Republican also from Tennessee, Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, Troy Nehls, Republican from Texas, and Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida. It does worry me a little bit that this proposed UAP caucus that's set up last fall, at least publicly, is more overtly Republican than Democrat. But I am told that behind the scenes there are a lot of Democrat reps who've taken a very strong interest in this UAP issue. There have been secret meetings, secret briefings, and of course in a number of committees, the House Oversight Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, you've got an extraordinary number of witnesses that have come forward in the last 2 years to give evidence of what they know about a legacy retrieval and reverse engineering program. And crucially, it's very, very important for people to understand most of these witnesses never went near Arrow. They wouldn't go touching the Defense Department's UFO investigation office with a stinky barge pole. They didn't trust them. Neither did David Grush. David Grush's evidence is locked up in-camera evidence that was provided in a skiff heard by the most highly cleared staffers in the Congress. And it's David Grush particularly who's given evidence of locations, facilities, the people who are running this program, the people who are responsible for the retrievals, the organisations, the names. He's given full chapter and verse detail. Then, as well as that, you've got other witnesses who've come forward in the past 2 years who've also given direct first-hand evidence. And this shows the lie to the claims made by the UAP investigation office in the Pentagon, the ARROW, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, led at the time by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. It shows the lie to the claims made by that organisation in the historical review released earlier this month, which basically asserts that there's no evidence of a retrieval or reverse engineering program involving NHI, a non-human intelligence. Or actually what they said was ET, extraterrestrial. And I think that's very important, because they did exclude, by answering in terms of ET, extraterrestrial, they're talking about off-planet entities. What if there's a life form that's always been on this planet? What if it's ultra-terrestrial? What if it's somehow here, but interdimensional, or somewhere else on this planet that we don't quite comprehend the location of? There are a number of explanations that I've heard in dark rooms, in whispered chats, and I think it's time for the Congress to start taking these allegations seriously. And Representative Burlison and 7 other congressional representatives agree with me. And they are taking it seriously. And the great thing about it is that inside the Congress, there's a broad bipartisan support now, a push for questions to be asked and for answers to be given. And to that extent, what Representative Burlison has said is that he thinks the government is providing very little clarity on the origins and what it knows about these UAPs. He also says, and this is a great quote, "A major barrier has been a lack of cooperation and evasion of congressional scrutiny from the DoD and the IC, the Defense Department and the intelligence community, which has only deepened public mistrust." And he's emphasised it's unclear just how much public funds are being spent analysing and investigating UAPs. Well, sir, and all of your colleagues, I can tell you, if you dig, you will find. There are people who are willing to speak to your committee. They just need the protections that whistleblowers need to feel comfortable about coming forward, and in particular about speaking publicly. So what this committee needs, and this is going to be a real test for Speaker Johnson, and indeed for the Defence Department and the intelligence community. Let's preface everything I say here with the fact that the crucial point to make all the way through here is if they've got nothing to hide, then they can be completely open. If the Pentagon's being completely truthful with the Congress that it has no evidence of NHI, no evidence of ET, no evidence of exotic recovered non-human technology, prove it. Open the books. Disclose. I think there's going to be some very interesting evidence that comes out in the run. The reason this matters is because if this is true, and I've said this, I feel like a scratchy record, this is the biggest secret in human history. It's not just an American national security secret. It's a secret for humanity. If it's true that the United States is aware of the existence of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet, if it's true that the United States, as David Grush and numerous other witnesses have told me, are alleging, there is a reverse engineering program involving non-human technology. If that's all true, it's just like nothing else matters. It's big, it's huge, it's gigantic, and it should be revealed. And I think what the committee needs to do is make sure that it does respect national security. There are a lot of good people in ARRO, in the Pentagon UFO office, who are frustrated with the former leadership of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. They're actually pissed with the fact that he has misrepresented what many of them, think. And they're anxious to see this story properly told. So are people in the defence and intelligence community. They're just looking for an opportunity. And look, I sense a huge frustration from the comments that I've received from our viewership that there's a view, oh, look, just bring it all out. You know, these people should just come out and tell all, and the Pentagon and the intelligence community wouldn't dare attack them. Well, believe me, they would. They're very vengeful. They're very vindictive. And for a lot of these people working in defence and intelligence, the one thing that they have that is vital for their continuing employment is their security oath protection, their clearances, their top secret SCI compartmentalised clearances, and particularly the programs that they've been read into, which I understand operate as waived, unacknowledged special access programs. The reason why there's been a breakdown in accountability and the reason why this committee is so important is that, yes, there are special access programs that regulate the secrets relating to this legacy retrieval and reverse engineering program, but they've been hidden in a way that has actually deliberately falsified evidence and misled Congress. Even members of the so-called Gang of Eight, the ultimate oversight body of these secrets in the Congress, have not been read into this. I know that for a fact. This is why it matters. We now have an incredibly important moment in American history. It's a tipping point. It's an inflection point where the Congress is finally getting the opportunity or seeking the opportunity to do its job. The House Oversight Committee is the most powerful oversight, accountability, transparency committee in the House, in the lower house of Congress and the House of Reps. If it's given this job, if it's given this committee, and if it's given the clearances, and if it can ensure the protections for the whistleblowers who do want to come forward, what can happen is quite explosive, and it can happen very, very quickly. And what I find interesting is that there's something this committee knows, there's something these representatives know that they're not letting on about publicly. Representative Burlison talks about new evidence. He talks about how he's very aware that they're being lied to and misled by the Pentagon. What does he know that we publicly don't yet know? It's going to be very, very interesting to see what comes out of all of this. So, we don't yet know whether Burlison and his 7 colleagues have got the support of Speaker Johnson. So, if you care about this issue, America's a democracy, write a letter. Write a letter to your congressional representative, to your senator, and let them know this matters. Now, there's a terrific interview that my colleague Blake Berman did earlier this week with Representative Eric Burlison. Have a listen.
Joining us now is the congressman from Missouri, Congressman Burlison. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. What do you want here?
Great to be here.
Is this a new committee? And how receptive is the House Speaker Mike Johnson to this?
Yeah, we've reached out to Mike Johnson. I think that this is the next step, is to send a formal letter. Look, I'm lucky to have other colleagues that are part of the UAP caucus that we're all taking this matter very seriously. We took the whistleblower, David Grush, and his allegations very seriously. I think we took the testimony of pilots who have had these near-miss encounters and have seen these objects. We've taken their concerns very seriously, and I think that we owe it to the American people to shed light on the expenditures that are, all the money that's being used to investigate these matters. This needs to be done in a transparent way, and we're trying to do this in a very thoughtful way, which is why I think that we need the resources. We need to have a select committee so that we can have the staff in place who are dedicated to this cause.
Is the Speaker on your side?
I don't know yet. I have a feeling I'll look forward to hearing from him, but okay. I know that we've got, Chairman Comer on our side. We've got, Tim Burchett and other members of the UAP caucus. And
Democrats
so hopefully
and
we'll get a response from the Speaker.
Yep.
Yes.
Here was the report, Congressman.
Representative Moskowitz.
Yep, exactly. Here was the report from the Pentagon last week, basically pushing back on David Grush's testimony and the idea that there's a secret crash retrieval program. Quote, Arrow, which is the government agency overseeing this, assesses that all of the named and described alleged hidden UAP reverse engineering programs provided by interviewees either do not exist, are misidentified authentic national security programs that are not related to extraterrestrial technology exploitation, or resolve to a de-established program. Do you trust, Congressman, the Pentagon on this when that is their finding, or do you think there is more there to look into?
I don't, because they weren't transparent to us in a SCIF setting, so they could have brought forward evidence. They could have explained what these special access programs actually do, but they are not willing to do that with Congress. So to me, it's time that they open the kimono, that they show us exactly what's happening, because they should, if they're doing something that's good for the American people, if they're being responsible with taxpayer dollars, they should have nothing to hide.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there. And Congressman, thanks for joining us. Come back when if you get this committee formed and let us know what exactly you're tracking down. Congressman Eric Burlison from Missouri. Thank you, sir.
Anytime.
G'day, Joe. Thanks for speaking to me. I'm very interested to know this UAP Select Committee idea. It's been mooted before and it was knocked back by Speaker McCarthy last year. What do you think is the chance of this succeeding this time?
Well, it is a little bit different now. You've got a different Speaker of the House in Mike Johnson. And if you talk to folks who were on the caucus, the informal UAP caucus, what they will tell you is they feel like there's a bit more of a chance to move this thing forward with a Johnson speakership than the previous leadership. Now, obviously, it's going to be up to the leadership, Hakeem Jeffries on the Democratic side and Johnson, to officially approve what they want to do, because remember, they're asking for a select committee, not just a caucus, not an informal group. This would be a newly established committee within the House of Representatives exclusively dealing with this issue. So it would need to go through leadership. And again, if you talk to members who are passionate about this issue, they feel like there's at least a bit more of a chance. And of course, just the news moving further and further along, they believe gives them a little bit more momentum this time around. They're more hopeful now than they were maybe 6 months ago when we were asking them the question about whether they may be able to actually form a committee like this.
So, Joe, the thing that strikes me most of all is it's utterly absurd. You've got the Pentagon denying extraterrestrial contact of any kind, knowledge of any kind of retrieved non-human technology, and yet in the Congress, even from the public statements, it's quite clear that congressional representatives are of the view that they're not being told the full story by the Pentagon or by the intelligence community. Is that your sense?
So that is my sense. If you talk to people, especially on the House side of the Capitol, who are interested in the topic, who want to continue to learn more, their biggest frustration is they're hearing certain things from people who can't go public, and they think they are not getting the information that they need from the Pentagon, from the DOD specifically. And we know that this report recently, this Arrow report came out, but they're simply feeling like they need more resources, they need more access. And actually, that's at the heart of their request to establish this committee, because they feel like if they are a legitimate committee here of jurisdiction over this issue, they would have more authority to get access to some of the information that they're at least seeking, that they feel like they're still, after months and months, being stonewalled from getting. So that's really the heart of their frustration there, is that access and the real information. Many of them feel like it's not just that they're not getting it. In some cases, lawmakers feel like they're being misled. And we've heard that from, not just one or two members, but from a larger group of them.
So, Joe, one of the things that worries me a little bit about this proposed UAP Select Committee is it ain't worth jot unless those members get the security clearances that allow them to ask the questions that go into Title 50 security issues. And this was one of the big hindrances in the past for the committee, that they couldn't get the security clearances that would allow them to even question people, even inside a SCIF, a secure room, about things like WUSAPs, waived, unacknowledged special access programs. Do you know, are they trying to get the security clearance that they'll need to be able to be effective as a committee, and are they likely to get it?
It's a good question that I don't think they even know the answer to, whether they, even if they establish a committee, will have different levels of clearance. But I can tell you that it's not something that they're speculating about or guessing as to whether they don't have the proper clearance. They are being told as much when they go into these, classified briefings. There were two, one from the intelligence community, one from the Defense Department, who gave these classified briefings to a handful of House members. And many of these members came out of those briefings, at least the first one from the DOD, frustrated because they said they were told they didn't have the proper clearance to hear the answers to the questions that they were asking, which obviously is going to be frustrating. If you're a lawmaker, right, who's trying to get information and you think, I'm a sitting member of Congress, I've got the pin, I've got the badge, I should be able to get access to this information. So that's a big point of contention. And again, part of the reason why they feel like if they can at least establish a new committee, maybe that gives them a better hand if it comes to trying to get that clearance, to either get it themselves or to be able to be approved to hear in a classified setting things from people with the proper clearance to even answer those questions. So it is a conundrum for them that we've heard a lot of frustration about, Ross.
So there are 7 members who've spoken in this letter to Speaker Johnson, identifying themselves effectively as members of what's loosely called the UAP caucus. And as I understand it, This was a coalition of representatives that was created back last fall. Who are they, and what's this all about, the UAP caucus?
So I would put this into two categories among members of Congress when it comes to interest in the UAP issue. You've got like tier 1 members, and they would be people like Tim Burchett, people like Jared Moskowitz, who's a Democrat, and others, Congressman Burlison, who are really interested in pushing forward aggressively, trying to get more access, more information, trying to form this committee themselves. And then you've got what I would call a tier 2, which are members of Congress who are certainly interested in the topic, who may not be on the front lines and actually doing the work of trying to get this, but are at least open and at least, curious about the topic enough to be asking questions. Now, it was clear sort of who those two groups were back in that unprecedented hearing that we had in July, where you had David Grush, where you had others who were testifying under oath, talking about things we've never heard before Congress, right? And you could hear people like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, a Republican, asking serious questions, digging in, who, again, I may put in that category 2. Now, those are people who maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it would almost be unheard of that you'd have members of Congress at that level asking these kinds of questions and not just dismissing outright claims about UAPs or a reverse engineering program as totally ridiculous. So it shows you just how far the ball has moved forward in this building in the Capitol, that you've got members of Congress in the Senate and in the House who are taken very seriously, all the way up to Senator Chuck Schumer, who has put forward an amendment in the NDAA asking essentially for much more openness, much more clarification about non-human intelligence, and that's the language he's been writing. It just shows you how far these members have come. So there's a big spectrum, Ross, of interest when it comes to certain members of Congress. Those 7 who put their names on this petition, essentially, to the Speaker of the House, I would put at the very highest level when it comes to those really pushing forward on the issue.
Missouri Congressman Representative Eric Burlison has said in interview, I think it was with Blake Berman, that he believes he has the support of Chairman Comer, James Comer, from the Oversight Committee. Do you agree with him? Is Comer outspoken on this? Is he prepared to stick his neck out and say that he'll support a UAP select committee?
He's not outspoken on this, but Congressman Burlison told me the same thing. And if we can toot our own horn here, NewsNation broke this story. We had been talking to many members of that group, including Congressman Burlison. I'm not sure that Comer is outspoken in the sense that he's not really out front. And if you ask him questions about this topic, he usually defers to people like Burlison, like Tim Burchett. But I will say the hearing that we had here on Capitol Hill that was unprecedented was in the Oversight Committee, which Chairman Comer is at the top of, and it wouldn't have happened without his okay. So he is certainly not a hindrance in any way. I don't know that he is, the one that is moving the momentum, but I don't think he's getting in the way of it either. And I think in that sense, he is going to be an important figure because he's going to be one of the gatekeepers for the efforts on this topic moving forward.
So, Joe, give me your crystal ball. I mean, the thing that worries me a little bit about this caucus is these aren't high-powered members. These aren't very senior members of the House, but they clearly do have connections to people like Schumer and Comer. What do you think? Do you think that the numbers are more against such an idea, a UAP select committee in the House, or do you think there's a really good chance this time that this one might get up?
Yeah. So I am not in the prediction game because I'm often wrong. But if I'm going to take a shot at it, what I would tell you is I think it's certainly possible, and I think that there are real, genuine interests in doing this. But I think the biggest challenge isn't so much an establishment pushing back on the committee. I think it's just that most members of Congress don't have this topic as their number 1 or 2 or 3 priorities. And if you're the Speaker of the House, he just said, yesterday or the day before, he's getting 3 hours of sleep. He's got a million things he's dealing with. So you've got, the government funding issue that continues to come up. You've got a war that's going on in Ukraine and a war in Gaza. You've got TikTok issues right now. You've got trade issues that they're dealing with. So while certainly there are some members, those 7 you've identified here, who put their names on this list, who, for them, maybe this UAP issue is really at the top of their list. But when it comes to the Republican leadership in the House and even the Democratic leadership in the House in an election year, mind you, and you've got all kinds of things like immigration and border funding as well. There are just a lot of other things that are going to get in the way that their offices are getting phone calls about, more so than this issue. And so I think the biggest hindrance to establishing a committee like this may not be, the DOD pushing back or something like that. It may simply be bandwidth for a lot of members. So just to be frank with you, that I think is going to be a huge challenge in getting this done, is just getting the Speaker's attention and time to be able to establish this, because it's not an easy step, and it's not like anyone just throws out a committee and they establish it. It takes a lot of time, a lot of eyeballs, a lot of approval. So, it's possible, but it's going to be a challenge.
Joe, what does it mean to have a UAP select committee as distinct from it just being talked about in one of the normal subcommittees of the House Oversight Committee? What can a select committee do on UAPs that it can't do currently?
So what it would do, and imagine if you had one now, you would have a chairperson of that committee, the top-ranking Republican. You'd have a ranking member, the top Democrat, on that committee. They would potentially have the power themselves to issue subpoenas to to the Department of Defense, to private companies. And the House of Representatives has that power now. But what they lack is the will, because of all the other reasons that I've talked about. This is not an issue when you look at the laundry list of things, from immigration to wars to all of the other things, that is really high priority. So a select committee would focus exclusively on this. It would have its own staff. It would have its own potentially lawyers, investigators, people who would work on this issue alone in a way that they don't do right now. And the subpoena power would be key, because imagine a subpoena in the hands of somebody like a Congressman Burlison or like a, Congresswoman Luna or something along those lines, right? There would be a lot more interest and I think a lot more action and activity. Right now, these members that we've identified who are, on the front lines of this fight, they have to go through the regular committee process to get those kinds of things done. And if they had their own jurisdiction and committee, they wouldn't have to do that. They'd be able to just move forward on things as they came up. So certainly I think that would be something that would be a huge advantage to them, that they would really want to get done, that they don't have the power to do now.
So final question, Joe. In history, the most glaringly obvious example of a committee that really did hold the Defence Department and the intelligence community to account was, of course, the 1970s Church Committee, which did an incredibly intensive investigation into the CIA. It had public hearings where former director of CIA and former senior executives of CIA were called and put under oath and forced to reveal things that were often criminal and illegal that had been conducted in the name of national security. Is there the power in a UAP select committee to do that kind of thing?
I don't think so at the beginning, but I think if this were to be established, the key thing here in Capitol Hill that maybe people don't quite understand from home is momentum is everything, right? If there's momentum behind the work that is being done, let's say that there is a select committee that is established here, they may have to start small, but the more things that are revealed, the more on this topic that is, uncovered or acknowledged from the Pentagon, from Arrow, from others, that creates real momentum and that creates real credibility. And once that ball is rolling, then I think you would start to get maybe heavier hitters, bigger players, and then all of a sudden this becomes a much more upfront issue, not just in this building, but I think among the public. And I think that's why it was so important when, you may remember, I referenced earlier, the amendment to the NDAA that Chuck Schumer put his name on, that Senator Mike Rounds put his name on. These are people who are taken very seriously, who are very well respected, not just among their own parties, but the opposite parties as well. So I think it may start small, but it would take that momentum, and it may take some time. As you referenced with the Church Committee, it's not something that was done overnight, right? Things have to build, momentum has to build, and I think that would be the key there.
Joe Khalil, it's a pleasure to plunder your political brain, my friend. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and we look forward to talking to you here on Reality Check sometime soon in the future.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me, Ross.
Good on you, Joe. Thanks very much. So that's Joe Khalil's analysis of the likelihood of the UAP caucus in Congress being able to swing this UAP Select Committee. I think the real crunch decision is going to come when the Defence Department and the intelligence community, even if they do get this committee up, are they going to approve the security clearances for these members to be briefed, even inside a secure SCIF, about just what it is that the Defence Department and the intelligence community really do know about UAPs? It's very interesting that, as Joe said, in the past, there's been blocks put on the House of Representatives members trying to get UAP questions asked. Because frankly, if there is nothing to hide, if, as Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and the Pentagon have claimed, there is no secret extraterrestrial knowledge or NHI technology that's been recovered, if that really is the case, well, why on earth all the secrecy? And that's the conundrum here, is that clearly representatives think they're being lied to. They think they're being misled by the Pentagon and by the intelligence community. Tim Burchett very colourfully said in one interview that he did with NewsNation, quote, "The Pentagon is lying. Since 1947, they told us these things don't exist, and yet they spend tens of millions of dollars on these things, on studying something, yet they won't release the reports. They're redacted. They look like somebody shot him with the 12-gauge shotgun." Tim Burchett's a colourful character, and I like the way he phrases himself. But I think the other thing that I think we need to give voice to are the comments from our viewers. And there's a few that are very, very interesting. There's a number of people. There's Tony Ascot 8620 who's commented on our YouTube. "I don't get it. There's technology that's only being given to a few that could possibly change our planet. Why is no one else screaming from the rooftops at this point?" Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Tony, because the reason that I'm often given by people inside the security establishment is that we can't reveal. It's not good for the US to reveal even the knowledge of an existence of NHI, because to do that is a slippery slope. If you reveal the existence of ET, NHI, you then have to reveal whether or not you've recovered biologics or technology. Now, frankly, I don't agree with that. I think we live in a country, all of us have lived in a system where, for example, we know that nuclear weapons exist, but we know that we shouldn't know how to make them. That's something that's quite rightly within the preserve of national security. It's a secret that shouldn't be shared. And if it's true that the United States has recovered technology of non-human origin, which I do think is true, then I can understand why there might be some resistance to revealing what that technology is. What I don't understand, and indeed what I know many representatives in the Congress question, and senators, is why we can't be told, if it is the case, that we are and have been in contact with a non-human intelligence. There's another viewer who's commented and asked, Brian Alley, 1531, asked, when Daniel Sheehan, the attorney, came across those photographs, did he not write down the details of the particular film roll? Were the frames showing the photographs devoid of any identifying information? His remarks suggest that he, in fact, did not note any of this information. Brian, I have to admit, when I first interviewed Daniel Sheehan about what he saw in the uncompleted archive building, the Madison building near Congress, I couldn't believe that what he told me is actually what happened. He says that as soon as he saw those images of what he says was an obvious recovered non-human craft, a flying saucer lying in a snowdrift being looked at and filmed by US soldiers dressed in US Air Force uniforms from around about the 1940s. He says he completely freaked. He panicked. And as a result of the panic, even though he had many hours left during the day, there were 2 G-men sitting outside who were supervising his access to the material, but they weren't in the room. I think he was so genuinely shocked. Maybe it was Danny Sheehan's ontological shock. He just couldn't bring himself to do what you and I probably would have wanted to have done, which is sit there and go through all that material for as long as possible. I mean, the thing that frustrates me, and he admits he screwed up on this, the thing that frustrates me is if I'd had the opportunity to go through the archives, the classified archives from Project Blue Book that revealed what the Pentagon truly did know about UAPs. This is the one opportunity ever in history that I know of where an individual from outside the legacy program has been allowed access. And Daniel Sheehan was done this through the auspices of the Congressional Research Service on behalf of President Jimmy Carter. So there was a presidential fiat here. There was a presidential order that the CIA endeavor to provide that information. And so I guess they had to follow through. So yes, it is frustrating. I agree with you. It is very, very frustrating that we can't we can't get more information. But what we do know, if you believe Daniel Sheehan, and I do, what we do know is that there are these files and they're being improperly withheld. And it really does raise a question. It's why Daniel Sheehan called out Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. Because frankly, if those files exist, as I believe they do, or at least they existed in 1977, what on earth is Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick talking about with his historical review of the UAP question? It's clear there is a whole archive that he has not been given access to. And was that because ARO didn't have the Title 50 access that allowed it to have access to this program? And is it because without that Title 50 access, the people in charge of that program, however immorally, decided to take it upon themselves to lie to even the Pentagon's chief official in charge of investigating UAPs? These are questions that we're going to keep on digging into on Reality Check because you, the public, want to know more, and so do I. And we're not going to let go. Thanks so much for talking and getting back to me on the YouTube channel. We love your tips. We love your comments. And we're here to keep on digging. Thank you again. See you next time on Reality Check.